Sarah had always considered herself a practical person. She was someone who liked to plan ahead, prepare for emergencies, and never let life's little surprises catch her off guard. But sometimes, no matter how much you try to stay organized, life throws curveballs that leave you scrambling. And on this particular evening, Sarah found herself smack in the middle of one such chaotic moment. A situation so overwhelming it made her question every decision she'd ever made. It all began with a sound. A low gurgling noise coming from somewhere deep within her apartment walls. At first, Sarah ignored it, thinking it might just be the wind or some distant construction work outside. But then came another noise, this time louder, sharper, like metal groaning under pressure. That's when panic started creeping into her mind. Rushing toward the source of the disturbance, she discovered the worst possible scenario: a burst pipe in her kitchen sink. Water was already pooling across the floor, spreading rapidly like a miniature flood. The icy liquid soaked through her socks almost instantly, sending chills up her legs. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," Sarah muttered frantically, hopping around as she tried to figure out what to do next. Her hands trembled as she grabbed towels from the nearby cabinet and tossed them onto the floor in a futile attempt to soak up the water. But the leak showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, it seemed to grow worse by the second. Droplets sprayed everywhere, soaking her clothes and leaving puddles on the countertops. She knew she needed help, fast. But who could she turn to? Her landlord, Mr. Thompson, or at least that's what she thought his name was notoriously unreachable. Every call went unanswered, every text ignored. It wasn't uncommon for tenants in her building to complain about his lack of responsiveness. Some even joked that he lived on another planet because he rarely showed his face around the property. For Sarah, this was supposed to be a fresh start, a cozy new apartment where she could focus on her career and rebuild her life after a rough breakup. Instead, she felt abandoned, standing ankle-deep in freezing water without anyone to rely on. Desperate, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through social media apps until she landed on a local community group page. With shaking fingers, she typed out a plea for help. "Emergency. Burst pipe in my kitchen. Anyone nearby who knows plumbing? Please help." After hitting send, she collapsed onto a chair, staring blankly at the screen while waiting for replies. Minutes ticked by, agonizingly slowly, each drop of water echoing like thunder in the otherwise silent apartment. Just when she thought nobody would answer, a notification popped up. Someone named Mark had responded, "I'm close by. Give me 10 minutes." Relief washed over Sarah like a tidal wave. She didn't know who Mark was, but right now, he sounded like a guardian, angel sent straight from heaven. Still, she couldn't shake off a nagging sense of caution. What if this was some kind of scam? Or worse, what if he turned out to be dangerous? These thoughts lingered in the back of her mind as she paced nervously, listening for footsteps outside her door. 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the door cautiously, peering through the narrow gap before fully unlocking it. Standing on the other side was a man who looked completely ordinary. He wore faded jeans, scuffed sneakers, and a dark hoodie zipped halfway up his chest. His hair was slightly messy, as though he'd rushed over without bothering to comb it, and his hands were tucked into the pockets of his jacket. Despite his casual appearance, there was something comforting about him, an aura of calmness that put Sarah at ease almost immediately. "Hi," he said with a friendly smile, holding up a toolbox. "I'm Mark. You posted about needing help. With a pipe?" "Yes, thank you so much for coming," Sarah exclaimed, stepping aside to let him in. As he entered, she noticed how effortlessly he carried himself, moving with confidence despite the cluttered mess in her apartment. Without wasting time, Mark headed straight for the kitchen, assessing the damage with sharp eyes. "Looks like we've got a real gusher here," he remarked, chuckling lightly. "Don't worry, though. I've seen worse." For the next hour, Sarah watched in awe as Mark worked his magic. He moved quickly yet methodically, shutting off the main water supply, unscrewing parts of the sink, and replacing the damaged section of the pipe. All the while, he kept up a steady stream of conversation, sharing funny anecdotes about past plumbing disasters he'd encountered. One story involved an elderly woman whose cat had accidentally chewed through a hose, causing chaos in her living room. Another revolved around a stubborn clog that turned out to be caused by an entire bag of potato chips flushed down the toilet. Each tale brought a smile to Sarah's face, distracting her from the stress of the situation. But what truly amazed her was how calm and composed Mark remained throughout the ordeal. Even when the water refused to stop leaking initially, he didn't lose his temper or show frustration. Instead, he simply adjusted his approach, trying different tools until he found the solution. Watching him handle everything with such grace made Sarah feel oddly reassured. For the first time since moving into the apartment, she felt like she wasn't alone anymore. As they worked together cleaning up the remaining mess, Sarah couldn't help but notice small details about Mark. There was a faint scar above his left eyebrow, barely visible unless you looked closely. His hands were calloused, evidence of years spent fixing things with his own two hands. And though his jokes were light-hearted, there was a depth to his voice, a sincerity that hinted at layers beneath the surface. Something about him intrigued her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. By the time they finished mopping up the last traces of water, it was well past midnight. Exhausted but grateful, Sarah offered Mark a cup of tea as a token of appreciation. Sitting at her tiny kitchen table, they continued chatting, their conversation shifting from plumbing mishaps to broader topics like hobbies, favorite movies, and childhood memories. Mark revealed that he enjoyed woodworking in his spare time, crafting furniture pieces that he often gave away to friends and family. Sarah, on the other hand, confessed her love for baking, though she admitted she hadn't had much success lately due to her hectic schedule. "You should make something sometime," Mark suggested warmly. "I bet it'll turn out great." "I'll keep that in mind," Sarah replied with a laugh, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. For the first time since moving into the apartment, she felt a genuine connection with someone, a spark of friendship that brightened her otherwise lonely existence. What Sarah didn't realize, however, was that this seemingly random encounter would set off a chain of events she could never have anticipated. Little did she know the man sitting across from her, this kind, helpful stranger, wasn't just any neighbor. In fact, he wasn't a neighbor at all. But that revelation would come later. For now, all she cared about was the warmth of companionship and the relief of knowing she wasn't facing her problems alone. And as Mark packed up his tools and prepared to leave, he paused briefly at the doorway, glancing back at Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "If you ever need anything else," he said softly, "don't hesitate to reach out. Seriously, I mean it." With those parting words, he disappeared into the night, leaving Sarah to wonder, not just about the mysterious man who had saved her evening, but also about the strange feeling of familiarity that lingered long after he was gone. The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The chaos from the previous night, the burst pipe, the icy water flooding her kitchen, felt like a distant memory now. As sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, she stretched lazily, replaying snippets of her conversation with Mark in her mind. His jokes, his calm demeanor, and the way he'd handled the emergency so effortlessly left an impression on her. She couldn't shake off the sense that there was something special about him, even if she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Her first thought was gratitude. She decided right then and there that she would bake cookies as a thank you gift. After all, baking was one of her favorite hobbies, even though she hadn't done it in ages. Pulling out ingredients from her pantry, flour, sugar, chocolate chips, she got to work, humming softly as she mixed the dough. There was something therapeutic about the process, the rhythmic kneading of the mixture helping her clear her mind. By the time the cookies were baked and cooled, they smelled heavenly, filling her apartment with a warm, inviting aroma. With a plate of cookies in hand, Sarah headed to Mark's apartment. She knew which unit he lived in because he'd casually mentioned it during their late-night chat. Standing outside his door, she knocked gently, balancing the plate carefully in one hand. But after several moments, there was no answer. Frowning slightly, she tried again, this time knocking a bit louder. Still nothing. Disappointed but not deterred, she placed the plate on the floor just outside his door, along with a note. "Thanks. Again for saving me last night. These are for you." As she turned to leave, Sarah noticed something odd. A handwritten envelope tucked halfway under her own doormat back at her apartment. Curious, she picked it up and examined it closely. Her name was written neatly across the front in bold black ink. Puzzled, she opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. At first glance, it looked like a receipt, specifically a rent payment receipt for her apartment. Confusion clouded her face as she read the accompanying message scrawled at the bottom. "Glad I could help. Let me know if anything else goes wrong." Her heart skipped a beat. Rent receipt? Why would Mark have access to her rent records? Unless he wasn't just some random neighbor who happened to be good at plumbing. Slowly, realization began to dawn on her. Could it be possible that Mark was actually her landlord? The same elusive figure everyone complained about being impossible to reach? It seemed absurd, too coincidental, but the evidence was staring her in the face. For the rest of the day, Sarah found herself obsessing over the possibility. Every detail from the previous night replayed in her mind, each one taking on new meaning. The toolbox he carried, the confidence with which he navigated her apartment's plumbing system, the casual way he spoke about repairs, it all pointed toward someone familiar with the building's inner workings. And then there was the fact that he knew exactly where to find the main water shutoff valve, without asking for directions. None of it added up, unless he had intimate knowledge of the property. Determined to get answers, Sarah decided to keep an eye out for Mark. Over the next few days, she paid closer attention whenever their paths crossed. Whether it was in the hallway, the parking lot, or even the laundry room, she observed him more closely than before. What struck her most was how normal he seemed. Unlike the stereotypical landlord she'd heard horror stories about, Mark didn't act entitled or condescending. Instead, he greeted her warmly every time they met, asking how things were going and offering small favors whenever she needed them. One afternoon, while sorting through mail in the lobby, Mark approached her with a friendly smile. "Hey, did you enjoy those cookies?" he asked, nodding toward the plate she'd left outside his door. Sarah hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to confront him directly. Deciding to play it cool, she smiled back and said, "Yeah, I hope they turned out okay. Thanks again for everything. You really saved me." "No problem," Mark replied easily. "Anytime you need help, just let me know." There was something about the way he said it, so genuine, so sincere, that made Sarah second-guess her suspicions. Maybe she was jumping to conclusions. Maybe the receipt was just a coincidence, or maybe he truly cared about his tenants in a way most landlords didn't. Still, curiosity gnawed at her relentlessly. That evening, as she sat alone in her apartment flipping through channels on TV, she finally mustered the courage to text him. "Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I want to ask you." She hit send before she could change her mind, then immediately regretted it. What if he guessed what she was thinking? What if he confirmed her suspicions and things became awkward between them? To her surprise, Mark replied almost instantly. "Sure thing. How about lunch? My treat." Relieved yet nervous, Sarah agreed. They arranged to meet at a cozy cafe downtown the following afternoon. As she drifted off to sleep that night, her mind raced with questions. Who was Mark, really? If he was indeed her landlord, why had he kept it a secret? And more importantly, how would knowing the truth change the dynamic between them? The next day, Sarah arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, her stomach fluttering with anticipation. She spotted Mark sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. When he saw her approach, he stood up and waved, his smile putting her at ease. "Hey, glad you made it," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. After ordering drinks and sandwiches, Sarah took a deep breath and broached the topic she'd been dying to discuss. "So, I wanted to ask you something," she began hesitantly. "It might sound weird, but are you my landlord?" Mark froze mid-sip, his eyes widening slightly. For a brief moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then slowly a grin spread across his face. "Well, I guess the cat's out of the bag," he admitted, setting his cup down. "Yes, I am, but please don't hold it against me." Sarah blinked, caught off guard by his candidness. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she asked, her tone a mix of confusion and curiosity. "I usually don't reveal that side of myself to tenants," Mark explained, leaning back in his chair. "I've learned over the years that people treat me differently when they know I'm the landlord. They either expect too much from me or assume I'm some greedy corporate type. So I prefer to stay low-key, blend in, and live among the tenants like everyone else. Last night was different. I couldn't stand by and watch you deal with that flood alone." His explanation made sense, but it also raised more questions. "Does that mean you're always fixing things around here yourself?" Sarah pressed. "Pretty much," Mark chuckled. "I grew up working with my hands, so it's second nature to me. Plus, hiring contractors can get expensive, and I'd rather save that money to improve the building overall, like installing better insulation or upgrading appliances, stuff that actually benefits everyone." Listening to him talk, Sarah felt a wave of admiration wash over her. Most landlords she'd encountered prioritized profit over people, rarely lifting a finger to address complaints unless absolutely necessary. But Mark was different. He genuinely cared about making life easier for his tenants, even if it meant rolling up his sleeves and doing the dirty work himself. "So you're saying you're basically a superhero landlord?" Sarah teased, smiling despite herself. "If only," Mark laughed. "But seriously, I appreciate your understanding. Not many people react this well when they find out." "Well, I guess I'm lucky then," Sarah replied softly. "Because honestly, meeting you has changed my perspective on landlords entirely." Their conversation flowed naturally after that, shifting from professional matters to personal interests. They talked about their dreams, fears, and aspirations, discovering surprising similarities along the way. Mark shared his passion for woodworking, showing Sarah photos of intricate furniture pieces he'd crafted over the years. In return, she told him about her love for baking, promising to bring him another batch of cookies soon. By the time they parted ways, Sarah felt a newfound respect for Mark, not just as a landlord, but as a person. Knowing the truth didn't make her feel betrayed. Instead, it brought them closer together. For the first time since moving into the apartment, she felt truly connected to someone who understood both her struggles and her triumphs. That night, lying in bed, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened. From the chaotic burst pipe to the unexpected revelation about Mark's identity, it had been quite the journey. Yet somehow, amidst all the twists and turns, she'd found a friend, and perhaps even something more. Only time would tell where this newfound bond would lead, but for now Sarah was content to take things one step at a time. Little did she know, however, that this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would challenge her perceptions, test her courage, and ultimately transform her life in ways she could never have imagined. After their heartfelt conversation at the cafe, things between Sarah and Mark began to shift in ways neither of them had anticipated. What started as a tentative friendship quickly blossomed into something deeper, a comfortable camaraderie that made both of them look forward to seeing each other. They weren't just tenant and landlord anymore. They were friends who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. But as their connection grew stronger, so did the unspoken questions lingering beneath the surface. Would this newfound closeness lead to something more? Or would it remain confined within the boundaries of professionalism? For Sarah, every interaction with Mark felt like peeling back another layer of his personality. He was full of surprises, quirky yet thoughtful, practical yet dreamy. One weekend, he showed up at her door unexpectedly with a small potted plant. "I noticed your apartment doesn't have much greenery," he said sheepishly, handing it over. "Figured this might brighten things up." The gesture touched her deeply, not only because it was sweet but also because it showed how observant he was. "Thank you," she replied, cradling the pot in her hands. "But aren't landlords supposed to charge extra for decorating tips?" Mark laughed, his eyes twinkling. "Let's call it a goodwill gesture instead. Besides, happy tenants make for a better neighborhood. His words stayed with her long after he left. It wasn't just about the plant. It was what it represented. Mark cared enough to notice the little details, to go out of his way to make her feel valued. In a world where most people seemed too busy or indifferent, his thoughtfulness stood out like a beacon of light. As weeks passed, their interactions became more frequent. Sometimes it was casual banter in the hallway. Other times it was longer, conversations during shared meals or coffee breaks. Sarah found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone else. She told him about her struggles at work, her fears of failure, and even her lingering heartache from her past relationship. To her surprise, Mark listened intently, offering advice when needed, but mostly just being there, a steady presence she could rely on. One evening, as they sat together on the steps outside the building watching the sunset, Sarah turned to him and asked, "Why are you doing all this? Most landlords wouldn't bother fixing pipes themselves or checking in on tenants regularly. You're different." Mark hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Then softly, he said, "I guess I've always believed that owning a building isn't just about collecting rent checks. It's about creating a community, a place where people feel safe and supported. Growing up, my family didn't have much, but we had neighbors who looked out for us. That sense of belonging meant everything to me, and I want to give that same feeling to others." Sarah nodded, understanding dawning on her. "That's why you live here among us, isn't it? To stay grounded?" He smiled faintly. "Exactly. Living alongside tenants reminds me of the challenges they face daily. It keeps me humble and motivates me to do better. For everyone." Their conversation ended with a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from mutual respect and shared understanding. For Sarah, it was another reminder of how unique Mark was. He wasn't perfect. He admitted freely that he sometimes struggled to balance his responsibilities. But he tried. And in her eyes, that effort mattered more than anything else. Meanwhile, Mark's commitment to improving the building continued to shine through. Inspired by Sarah's positivity and enthusiasm, he threw himself into making tangible changes around the property. First came fresh coats of paint in the common areas, replacing the dull beige walls with vibrant colors that gave the space new life. Next, he upgraded the laundry machines, installing energy-efficient models that reduced utility costs for everyone. Tenants began noticing these improvements almost immediately, and whispers of gratitude spread throughout the building. One day, Sarah spotted Mark standing near the courtyard, sketching designs on a notepad. Curious, she walked over and peeked over his shoulder. "What are you planning now?" she asked, pointing at the drawing. "A garden," he replied, grinning. "I figured it'd be nice to have some green space where people can relax. Maybe even grow vegetables if they're interested." "That's an amazing idea," Sarah exclaimed. "Can I help?" "Of course," Mark said warmly. "Your input would mean a lot." Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side, transforming the barren courtyard into a lush oasis. Together, they planted flowers, herbs, and shrubs, arranging them in patterns that complemented the space. Other tenants joined in too, contributing ideas and pitching in wherever they could. By the time the project was complete, the once empty courtyard had become a vibrant hub of activity, buzzing with laughter and chatter. As they celebrated the completion of the garden one sunny afternoon, Sarah realized how much Mark's presence had impacted not only her life, but also the entire building. People seemed happier, more connected, and less isolated. Even minor issues like creaky doors or flickering lights were addressed promptly, fostering a sense of trust and reliability. All of this stemmed from Mark's dedication, and perhaps indirectly, from Sarah's influence. But amidst all the progress, there was still an unspoken tension simmering between them. Both Sarah and Mark were aware of it, though neither dared to acknowledge it openly. Their friendship had grown so effortlessly that crossing into romantic territory felt risky. Yet moments of intimacy kept creeping in, like when Mark brushed stray hair away from Sarah's face during a windy afternoon in the garden, or when Sarah rested her hand briefly on his arm while laughing at one of his jokes. These fleeting gestures hinted at emotions neither of them fully understood yet. One chilly evening. As they strolled through the newly renovated courtyard under a blanket of stars, Sarah finally voiced what had been weighing on her mind. "Mark," she began hesitantly, "do you ever think about us?" Mark stopped walking, turning to face her. His expression was unreadable, though his voice betrayed a hint of vulnerability. "All the time," he admitted quietly. "But I didn't want to rush anything. You've been through a lot lately, and I don't want to complicate things further." "I know," Sarah said, looking down at her feet. "But maybe complications aren't always bad. Sometimes they're worth it." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt charged with anticipation, heavy with unsaid words. Then, slowly, Mark reached out and took her hand in his. "If you're sure," he murmured, his eyes searching hers. "Because once we cross this line, there's no going back." Sarah smiled, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm sure." In that instant, something shifted between them. The invisible barrier separating friendship from romance dissolved, replaced by a spark of possibility. They didn't kiss or make grand declarations. They simply stood there holding hands, basking in the quiet certainty of their decision. As they walked back to the building together, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. From a random plumbing emergency to late-night conversations, from shared projects to stolen glances, their journey had been anything but ordinary. And while she knew challenges lay ahead, balancing roles as tenant and landlord, navigating societal expectations, she also knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. Little did she realize, however, that their growing bond would soon inspire Mark to take his vision of community building to the next level. Plans were already forming in his mind. Ideas that would not only benefit the building but also bring its residents closer than ever before. But those plans would require courage, creativity, and unwavering support from someone who believed in him wholeheartedly. And as fate would have it, Sarah was exactly that person. Mark had always been a dreamer, but now he felt inspired in ways he never had before. With Sarah by his side, both as a friend and something more, he began to see possibilities everywhere. The courtyard garden was just the beginning. It was a spark that ignited a fire within him to transform the entire building into a thriving community hub. For years, he'd managed the property with efficiency, ensuring it ran smoothly and tenants were comfortable. But now he wanted to do more than simply maintain. It was time to elevate. One evening after dinner at Sarah's apartment, a cozy meal of homemade pasta she insisted on cooking despite his protests, Mark pulled out a stack of papers from his backpack. "I've been thinking," he said, spreading sketches and notes across her dining table. "What if we turned the unused basement into a shared space? Like a community center where people can gather, host events, or even start clubs?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A community center? In the basement? Isn't that going to be expensive?" "It will cost some money, yeah," Mark admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "But I think it's worth it. We could have movie nights, art workshops, book clubs, the works. It'll bring everyone closer together." She leaned forward, studying the sketches intently. There were detailed layouts showing seating areas, shelves for books, and even a small stage for performances. "This is amazing," she said finally, her voice tinged with excitement. "But it's also a huge project. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "I'm ready if you are," Mark replied, locking eyes with her. "You've already shown me how much impact one person can have. If we work together, I know we can make this happen." Sarah felt a swell of pride and responsibility. She hadn't expected Mark to involve her so deeply in his vision, but she couldn't deny the thrill of being part of something bigger. "All right," she said with a grin. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, their days revolved around planning and execution. Mark handled the logistics, hiring contractors, sourcing materials, and managing budgets, while Sarah focused on rallying support from the tenants. Together, they organized meetings to explain the idea and gather feedback. To their delight, The response was overwhelmingly positive. Some offered to volunteer their skills, like painting murals or teaching classes, while others pledged financial contributions to help cover costs. The transformation of the basement became a collective effort, uniting the building's residents in ways no one had anticipated. Sarah took charge of designing flyers and social media posts to promote upcoming events, her creativity shining through in every detail. Meanwhile, Mark worked tirelessly alongside the contractors, often staying late into the night to ensure everything met his standards. Despite the long hours, neither of them complained. They were too invested in seeing their dream come to life. As the project progressed, so did their relationship. Late-night brainstorming sessions turned into quiet moments of reflection, where they'd sit side by side, sharing thoughts and dreams. One evening, as they sipped tea in Sarah's kitchen, she asked, "Do you ever feel overwhelmed, like maybe this is too much?" Mark chuckled softly. "Sometimes. But then, I remember why we're doing this. Not just for the building, but for the people who live here. And honestly, having you beside me makes it easier." His words sent a warm flutter through Sarah's chest. She reached out, placing her hand gently on his arm. "You've changed things for me too, you know. Before I moved here, I felt lost, alone. But now, I feel like I belong somewhere again." Mark smiled, his gaze softening. "That means everything. To me, Sarah, you've changed me too, made me believe in what's possible." Their connection deepened with each passing day, growing stronger yet remaining grounded in mutual respect. They weren't rushing into anything reckless. Instead, they allowed their feelings to unfold naturally, nurtured by shared experiences and unwavering support. Even the occasional disagreement only strengthened their bond, reminding them that honesty and communication were key to any lasting relationship. By early spring, the basement was nearly complete. The once dingy space had been transformed into a vibrant, inviting area filled with colorful furniture, cozy lighting, and plenty of room for activities. A ribbon-cutting ceremony was scheduled for the following weekend, and anticipation buzzed throughout the building. Tenants decorated their doors with handmade signs congratulating Mark and Sarah for their hard work, while children excitedly planned games they wanted to play in the new space. On the day of the event, Sarah stood nervously near the entrance, clutching a pair of scissors for the ceremonial cutting. Mark appeared beside her, looking dapper in a crisp shirt and jeans. "Ready?" he asked, offering her a reassuring smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, laughing nervously. When the moment came, they stepped forward together, holding the oversized ribbon between them. As the crowd cheered, Mark turned to Sarah and whispered, "We did it." "Yes," she murmured, meeting his gaze. "We really did." After the ceremony, the festivities continued inside the newly renovated basement. Music played softly in the background as tenants mingled, chatting enthusiastically about future events. Children darted around playing tag, while adults exchanged recipes and gardening tips. It was exactly what Mark and Sarah had envisioned, a place where everyone felt welcome and connected. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Mark pulled Sarah aside to a quiet corner of the room. He looked at her earnestly, his expression serious yet tender. "There's something I need to say," he began, his voice steady. "All of this, the garden, the basement, everything, it wouldn't have happened without you. You inspire me, Sarah. Not just because of your talent or kindness, but because of who you are. Strong, compassionate, and fearless." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she listened, her heart swelling with emotion. "Mark, I know we've been taking things slow," he continued, reaching for her hand. "And I don't want to rush anything, but I can't imagine my life without you anymore. You've become such an important part of it in ways I never thought possible." Sarah squeezed his hand tightly, her voice trembling slightly. "I feel the same way. You've given me a home, not just four walls and a roof, but a place where I truly belong, with you." For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, Mark leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, heartfelt gesture that sealed their unspoken promise to build a future together. As they walked out of the basement hand in hand, Sarah glanced back at the bustling room behind them. The laughter, the chatter, the sense of unity, it was all proof of what love and determination could achieve. And though challenges undoubtedly lay ahead, she knew they would face them side by side, armed with courage and a shared vision. Little did they realize, however, that their journey was far from over. Just as their personal lives intertwined seamlessly, another chapter awaited, one that would test their resilience and redefine their roles not just as partners, but as leaders of the community they'd worked so hard to create. Months passed since the grand opening of the basement community center, and life in the building had taken on a new rhythm. What was once just a collection of apartments now felt like a true home, a place where people genuinely cared about one another. The garden thrived under the combined efforts of tenants who volunteered to water plants and harvest vegetables. Movie nights became a weekly tradition, drawing crowds of all ages to cozy corners of the basement. Art workshops introduced residents to talents they never knew they had, while book clubs sparked lively debates over coffee and homemade snacks. It was clear that Mark and Sarah's vision had come to life, and then some. But as much as things improved, challenges inevitably arose. One evening, during one of their quiet dinners together at Sarah's apartment, Mark broached a topic he'd been avoiding for weeks. "There's something I need to tell you," he said hesitantly, his tone serious enough to catch Sarah's attention immediately. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her fork. "The city has proposed rezoning parts of this neighborhood," Mark explained, rubbing his temples. "They're considering turning several blocks into commercial spaces. Office buildings, retail stores. You know the drill?" Sarah frowned, processing the implications. "Would that include our building?" "It might," Mark admitted, his voice heavy with concern. "If it does, we could lose everything we've built here. The community, the projects, it would all disappear." A wave of dread washed over Sarah. She thought about the friendships she'd formed, the sense of belonging she'd rediscovered, and the countless hours she and Mark had poured into making the building a better place. Losing it all seemed unimaginable. "Is there anything we can do?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can fight it," Mark replied firmly. "But it won't be easy. We'll need everyone's support, not just from the tenants, but from other neighbors too. It'll take organizing protests, gathering signatures, maybe even speaking at city council meetings." Sarah nodded slowly, determination replacing fear. "Then let's do it. Together." Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Mark threw themselves into the battle against rezoning. They started by hosting informational sessions in the basement, explaining the situation to tenants and outlining potential steps they could take. Flyers were distributed throughout the neighborhood, urging residents to attend town hall meetings and voice their concerns. Sarah used her social media skills to create petitions and spread awareness online, while Mark reached out to local advocacy groups for guidance and resources. Their efforts paid off quickly. Tenants rallied behind them, volunteering their time and energy to help however they could. Some organized carpool systems to ensure elderly neighbors could attend protests. Others wrote heartfelt letters to city officials, sharing stories of how the building had changed their lives. Even children pitched in, creating colorful posters that read, "Save our home," and hanging them in windows across the neighborhood. The first major test came during a city council meeting. Armed with folders full of documents, photos, and testimonies, Sarah and Mark stood before a panel of skeptical officials pleading their case. Sarah spoke first, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "This isn't just a building," she began. "It's a community, a family. Every corner of it tells a story of resilience, creativity, and connection. Please don't take that away from us." When it was Mark's turn, he focused on practical arguments, presenting data about the environmental benefits of maintaining residential spaces versus developing commercial ones. He emphasized how the building contributed positively to the neighborhood's character and economy. By the end of their presentation, even the most hardened council members seemed moved. Outside the courthouse, applause erupted as supporters cheered for Sarah and Mark. For the first time in weeks, hope flickered back to life. But the fight wasn't over yet. More hearings loomed ahead, along with endless paperwork and negotiations. Yet through it all, Sarah and Mark remained steadfast, drawing strength from each other and the community they'd worked so hard to build. One particularly grueling night, after hours spent reviewing legal documents, Sarah collapsed onto the couch beside Mark. "Do you think we're actually going to win this?" she asked, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I don't know," Mark admitted honestly. "But even if we don't, we'll have tried our best. And no matter what happens, I'm proud of what we've accomplished together." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a surge of gratitude. "Me too. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." Mark kissed the top of her head gently. "Same goes for me. You've taught me that love isn't just about being there for someone. It's about fighting alongside them no matter how tough things get." Their bond had grown stronger through adversity, forged in the fires of shared struggles and victories. Love wasn't just a fleeting emotion anymore, it was an anchor, a foundation upon which they built their future. Finally, after months of relentless effort, the verdict arrived. The rezoning proposal was rejected. Cheers erupted in the streets as news spread, with neighbors hugging and celebrating late into the night. In the midst of the jubilation, Sarah and Mark stood quietly together, watching the joy around them unfold. "We did it," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, we did," Mark replied, pulling her close. "And not just for ourselves, for everyone here." In the days that followed, the building buzzed with renewed energy. People threw parties, planted new flowers in the garden, and brainstormed ideas for expanding the community center. Life returned to its vibrant pace, but with an added layer of appreciation for what they'd almost lost, and ultimately saved. As summer approached, Sarah and Mark decided to celebrate their journey in a personal way. On a warm Saturday afternoon, surrounded by friends, family, and tenants who had become like extended relatives, they exchanged vows in the courtyard garden they'd created together. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting golden patterns on the ground as they promised to stand by each other through every challenge and triumph. Looking out at the crowd gathered to witness their union, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She realized that her life had transformed in ways she never could have predicted when she first moved into the apartment. From a lonely tenant struggling to fix a burst pipe to a woman deeply rooted in a loving community, she had found purpose, belonging, and love. All thanks to a man who had once been nothing more than a helpful stranger. For Mark, the ceremony marked not just the beginning of a new chapter with Sarah, but also the culmination of his lifelong dream. Owning a building had always been about providing shelter, but now he understood it meant so much more. It was about creating a space where people could thrive, connect, and grow together. Years later, as they sat side by side on the same steps, where they'd watched sunsets during the early days of their friendship, Sarah turned to Mark with a smile. "Do you remember when we first met? That flooded kitchen feels like a lifetime ago." Mark laughed softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I remember thinking you were incredibly brave, even if you didn't see it yourself. Little did I know, you'd end up saving me just as much as I saved you." Their laughter mingled with the sounds of the bustling courtyard below, a testament to the thriving community they'd built. Challenges would undoubtedly arise again, as they always did in life, but neither of them feared the future. Together they had proven that love, determination, and unity could overcome anything. And so their story continued, not as tenant and landlord, nor even as husband and wife, but as partners in every sense of the word, bound by a shared vision of hope, resilience, and unwavering commitment to the people and place they called home.